Welcome to the Private Practice Startup Podcast, where we help mental health professionals grow their dream practices and live a life they love. We chat with successful private practitioners, business coaches, and marketing experts, bringing you tons of practice building tips. We invite you to take advantage of our private practice paperwork and our signature marketing e-course. And we have a gift for you. This is the exact methodology we use to create our six-figure private pay practices and have helped many other therapists do the same. Go to privatepracticestartup.com and on the homepage, click the button to download a free copy of your dream private practice playbook. Now on to today's episode.
Welcome to another episode of the Private Practice Startup Podcast. Today, Susan Block and I, Kate Campbell, are co-hosting the show, and Susan's one of our amazing private practice coaches. If you haven't had a chance to get familiar with her yet, hi, Susan.
Hey, guys. Hey, Kate. How are you?
I'm good. It's great to have you here. This is going to be a fun episode. Today, we're actually having the pleasure of interviewing a past marketing e-course alumni and one of our brand ambassadors and a previous podcast guest, Faith Carlson. Hi, Faith.
Hello, hello. So excited to be here.
Yeah, welcome back. So we're going to talk today about how to fill your practice with becoming licensed in multiple states. But before we dive in, we want to welcome you. If you're a loyal listener, welcome back. And if you're new to Startup Nation, welcome to you too. We've got a gift for you. Head over to our website, privatepracticestartup.com, where you can download a copy of your dream private practice playbook. This is actually the exact methodology that Katie and I use to grow our six-figure private practices and have helped so many other therapists just like you to do the same. And before we dive into today's episode, we just want to say we hope you joined us last week. Katie and Susan actually had the opportunity of interviewing Susanna Horowitz on debunking 5 networking myths, even as an introvert. And if you're an introvert like me, that's definitely an episode that you're going to want to listen to. So, Faith Carlson, let's introduce you to Faith, is a member of the International Association of Eating Disorder Professionals. She is a published author, motivational speaker, and licensed therapist in both South Dakota, Minnesota, and a licensed telehealth therapist for Florida. Fun fact, Faith has discovered a superpower in a recent adult dyslexia diagnosis. Superpower, tell us a little bit about that.
Oh my gosh, I didn't even realize that with dyslexia, you actually see patterns. And as a therapist, this is like awesome to be able to see with clients patterns of behaviors. And so it kind of fast tracks me into really kind of hitting points that I think might be missed without having this gift, this ability to be able to catch patterns. And yeah, patterns of multi-state license. There's lots of patterns that as a therapist you can catch.
Very cool. Awesome. Well, before we dive into today's episode, how to fill your practice with multi-state licensing, let's go ahead and take a quick break to hear from our sponsors.
If you're a private practice owner, this is for you. Running a business is just plain hard. Endless to-do list, employees to take care of, and your ever-present bottom line. So first of all, kudos to you for staying on top of it. I want to tell you about Gusto. Gusto built an easier and more affordable way to manage payroll, benefits, and more. They help over 100,000 businesses with tasks like automated payroll tax filing, simple direct deposits, free health insurance administration, 401ks, onboarding tools, you name it, Gusto made it easy. And they really care about the small business owners they work with. Their support team is attentive and helpful. And since money can be tight right now, you'll even get 3 months free once you run your first payroll. Just go to gusto.com/PPS and start setting up your business today. You'll see what I mean when I say easy. Again, there's that 3 months free. Go to gusto.com/PPS.
All right. Welcome, Faith.
Thank you. I'm super excited to be here. Shout out to the Startup Nation. I always love seeing our new members in there as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're happy to have you, Faith.
Thank you.
Yes, we are. And I just want to say the last time we had you on the podcast, Katie and I were interviewing you and we literally were crying. We were in tears on the podcast episode because Faith was sharing her journey about how she went from being homeless to through all of the struggles that she faced to having a thriving practice and beautiful family. And it's just a really touching story. So if you haven't heard that, we'll include the link in the show notes for this episode. But let's go ahead and dive into today's topic. How did you get interested in becoming licensed in multiple states?
Great question. I think this is the question that anybody interested in this is going to be wanting to consider with this podcast is my why in getting multi-licensed is my location, really, and then the specialty that I work with. So the interest was where I'm located. I'm in the southeast side of South Dakota, which is bordering multi-state, so a tri-state location. And so that was one thing that it was a no-brainer. I have clients that come in out of state to South Dakota to do therapy. And so I'm actually serving clients in their residence by being able to be multi-state licensed.
Very cool. Tell us a little bit about the process and your experience of becoming licensed in multiple states. Was there reciprocity involved? Because I know sometimes that's an aspect where it can be easier to get licensed in some states versus others.
Yeah, that's a great question because I think since COVID, a lot of things changed with COVID and telehealth. They kind of put some state boundaries down. So kind of think of everybody being in their own state and having a fence around their state. The fence went down with COVID to be able to access other states. But it was a temporary thing. It wasn't anything that was actually set in stone. And so as COVID's kind of winding up and the fences went back up, for me to get my license then in a state right next door to us, I actually had to apply to the state board. You have to follow all the rules like you would if you were living in that state. So it is a process. It's not something that you can just jump online and quick, hit. You're going to be practicing in the state next door. It does take quite a few steps. I would say at least half a dozen steps.
If I can just add, I think, you bring up a really good point of, when you're in a smaller state and you're surrounded by other states, it's really important to have the, licenses in multiple states, especially with a specialty like yours, where you're really wanting to, make a greater impact on more people. But I imagine, and I have heard from so many people, the difficulty in actually contacting their boards or these different boards. Can I ask just how you found it to be the most helpful to actually go through with the whole process and actually reaching someone?
Yeah, absolutely. So the outline that you want to think of, when I think of patterns again, think of creating almost a file for each state that you would consider going into. And you're going to actually go to that state's website. So you're going to go to that state's licensing board and you're going to read it just like you would if you were living in that residency. So you're almost repeating what you did after you got graduated and were applying for licensure. You're going to read through their state laws and guidelines, and you really are doing a brand new application. The only difference with my South Dakota home state and then let's say Minnesota, a state I'm licensed in, is I notify my state that I did pick up an out-of-state license, but that's the only thing I do with my state. My state doesn't really, other than them just knowing that I got a license in Minnesota, that's the only information they want to know about. It's really working with those outside states that you really are staying in communication with, their emails, their phone numbers, anything on their website that you're correlating with.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, is just having a different file for each state, because each of them requires something a little different, and treating it as if you actually live in that state. So thank you so much for that.
Oh, absolutely. I was going to mention too that, with it, there's over 45, between all of the states, there's over 45 different licensing names and titles. So when you would think that your one license, that your home state license is, that it could just transfer over to another state, that's wrong. Each state has its own education requirements. Sometimes each state has its own license liability insurance requirements. They have their own internship hours that have to be accumulated, continuing education hours. So every state is very individual. There's no two states that are exactly the same. And that's why I would say you'd get an individual folder for each state based on what and why you're getting licensed in that state.
Yeah, that's really good feedback and information, so that as clinicians are really looking at the different states they want to get licensed in, they can keep everything organized and the status of the applications and all of those hoops that you have to jump through. Faith, what would you say are some of the main benefits to being licensed in multiple states?
I would say the main benefits is your value increases significantly because you are able to reach a client where they're at literally. Has a specialist in eating disorders. I'm able to meet my clients at their colleges, like being able to go where they go to college and then back to their home state. That's why I got my telehealth license in Florida, is having clients that actually go to college in Florida. And recognizing that, your marketability. You're not only a niche within your state, but you have that ability to go across state lines and support outside of your state. Your again, access to other professionals, other therapists. You're getting twice, almost double the referral resources as well, because you're in a different population pool that you're having access to as well.
Yeah, the expanded reach of being able to expand your marketing reach and to attract more ideal clients that you would want to work with in a larger area. And for someone who has such a unique niche and specialization like eating disorders, I would imagine some of the more rural areas have a hard time finding specialists and seeing a therapist who's really excellent at what they do. So you're able to help more people in that way.
Absolutely. And recognizing, all the clinicians, whatever they're focused in, that you already built your network in your area, you're expanding that network out. So for me, expanding network with medical doctors, expanding with psychologists, expanding with psychiatrists, I'm expanding that out, but a very specified area. So it's not just a swath of counseling everywhere. It is very, very specific to who I'm connecting with in my network in other states and supports as well.
Yeah. And in this day and age, I think, you talked about meeting your clients where they are, and, whether it's someone going off to college or someone who's a snowbird, maybe going from Minnesota to Florida for the winter, that it's really being able to reach, your clients wherever they are, and still continuing the services that they need so desperately, which is such a great thing. And in the world of COVID right now, it's more and more people are working remotely. They're traveling to different places and staying longer because they're able to work remotely. So it just sounds like a really great time to step into this.
Absolutely. And I would say the one thing that I would recognize as well is it's not a fit for everybody. So when one thinks of like, hey, I can expand my marketing, my resources, keep in mind that you also have to follow those state guidelines on mandatory reporting. You would think that was the same across all states, but they have different mandatory reporting. You also want to keep in mind that if there's an emergency where your client's at in another state, how do you get resources to them? You can't pick up the phone, call 911. That's going to go in your state area. So it is a detailed space that you just definitely want to make sure you have all your bases covered. You want to make sure your liability insurance is covered. You want to check with your CPA on taxes and such. You want to double check with the state laws and guidelines. So while it's complex, once it's set up, it's pretty smooth sailing once it's actually set up. But you just want to keep in mind all those little details about safety and how you would serve your clients in state. You want to replicate that for your clients out of state as well, not reduce it.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a really good point. And it's important to look at both the benefits and then the risks and challenges. And that's actually something that we include. We have in our package of attorney-approved private practice paperwork, we have a telehealth specific consent form. And we talk about the risks, the benefits, and the importance of having the emergency contacts and the address of where your client is to make sure that, like you said, if there's an emergency and your client has a stroke while you're on telehealth or a heart attack or God forbid something like that happens, if you call 911, it's going to dial in your area. Yeah. So being able to have all of that information ahead of time is so, so important. I'm glad you touch on that. It is really important to be able to navigate this whole world of telehealth and multi-state licensure, both legally and ethically.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that that's the biggest thing, especially as a new clinician, with I'm thinking of all my Startup Nation members that join up in there and just to support with those new clinicians, recognizing that the board isn't scary. Even if it's another state licensing board, get used to communicating with them, get familiar with how to reach out and support and ask questions, because they support us in our field, but they're not our enemies. So it's being able to have that collaboration and communication. If there's questions, concerns, they should be familiar accessing state licensing boards wherever they're at, whoever you're working with.
Yeah, and if I could add, Faith, this is such a great topic today, because I know one of the number one questions I think that gets asked in these, Facebook groups is, I have a client who is going to college out of state. I have a client who is going to be living part-time somewhere else. And what do I do? How do I go about it? Like, this is a question that keeps popping up. So I really think you're tapping into such a great topic for so many clinicians out there.
Yeah, and not to be afraid of it. I mean, they're talking to an out-of-state licensing state board is just as if we're talking to our in-state licensing board. They want to answer our questions. They want to support us. They're going to direct us in the right direction. And I think that that's a myth that had I, known earlier on that they're not out to get us. I think we get so scared about being, written up or sent to them or something, but they're a support and they should be, integrated into our contacts.
Is managing your practice stressing you out? Try Therapy Notes. It makes billing, notes, scheduling, and telehealth a whole lot easier. Check it out, and you will quickly see why it's rated the highest EHR on Trustpilot with over 1,000 verified customer reviews and an average customer rating of 4.9 or 5 stars. You'll notice the difference from the first day you sign up for the trial. They offer live phone support 7 days a week. So when you have questions, you can quickly reach someone who can help. You are never wasting time looking for answers. If you're coming from another EHR, they make the transition really easy. Therapy Notes will import your client's demographic data free of charge during your trial so you can get going right away. Use the promo code PPS to get your first 2 months for free or try out Therapy Notes for free, no strings attached, including their very reliable telehealth platform. Make 2021 the best year yet with Therapy Notes. You mentioned a little bit earlier, Faith, about marketing and expanding your reach in these areas and how you've used strategies in your local area where you are to market yourself, to become known as the expert in this particular area and building those relationships. How has that experience been for you, and what has worked in these new areas that you're establishing yourself and building that reputation, becoming known as the authority and the expert in your particular specialty?
It's been phenomenal because when you think about the opportunity to get into another state, think of a Psychology Today profile or a marketing with a medical field. When you think of the eating disorders who I'm marketing with, the word of mouth, not only it travels, but also recognizing when your client is in another state, they're communicating with their network of people that it automatically starts to flow back over anyhow. When I'm connecting with any of my marketing on either Facebook or I'm just thinking of, again, the profiles that we have access to as clinicians. All my correspondence has where I'm licensed, everything. It starts to show that you're licensed in multiple states, but not just to put more letters behind your name. It's intentional. I'm very, very intentional about where I'm getting licensed and who I'm working with because I'm making those connections and relationships. It's not about how many state licenses I can get, but the relationship I build, it builds itself in the marketing because the doctor's offices start talking to each other. I get calls from other clinicians. I get calls from other, because it just starts to build its own network off of itself. It's a snowball effect on how it supports itself.
And I would imagine that there has to be, when you have clients who are in different areas, different states from you, and some across the country, right? In Florida, where you're licensed for telehealth, being that you work with such a high risk population, I would imagine that there's probably, with that intentionality, even extra collaboration with the other treatment providers and medical professionals who are a part of the client's continuity of care and that care system. So how have you navigated all of that?
That's a great question. You're exactly right. Ethically, a treatment team is what I've created in this. And again, systems. Think of patterns and systems. Templates, outlines. There's an introductory letter I send out to all my clinicians that I'm working with out of state that says where I'm located, what I'm doing, what my expectations of providers are outside of state, just like our expectations of our clients when we're working out of state with them. So I provide templates and outlines, expectations, regular communication, that I'm sending out my information to them weekly. I would appreciate their information back to me as we communicate and collaborate. Recognizing as well, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. They don't have to pick up the phone and call. They can send faxes. They can email. Just again, streamlining things, especially when you're in multi-states. It's really important to have streamlined systems. You can't do this successfully and really ethically and at your best without having streamlined systems. Otherwise, you're just going to get bogged down and overwhelmed.
Yes.
Yeah. You even talked about just having streamlined systems and good communication for the betterment of your client. And I think that's everything.
Absolutely, because you are your own brand. When you think about what the services we do, we are creating what our marketability is. So if we're not communicating with our professionals, we're not communicating with our clients in a professional way that's consistent, you're creating that experience for them, and that's going to show. It's going to reflect that in the work that you do, but also in the work that they experience as well. So again, it's something that you come off the right way with the professionalism, connections with community, and staying ethically on board with all of the corners of supports. You're going to come across as competent and knowing what you're doing, because you do know what you're doing. It's so organized.
I'm wondering, are there any pitfalls that you found that you can maybe, talk with Startup Nation about, just some of those pitfalls that you've already kind of worked through that maybe would be helpful for them?
Absolutely. That's a great question, because I think one of the things you want to recognize in multi-state licensors is sometimes you have to retake the test. Like, you have to go back and take a test for some of these states. And it's their testing and their laws and their regulations. So you're not studying just yours, but another state's, which you should anyway, but it's again, a test. You have to pay for those tests. You have to schedule it. You have to remember your CEUs, continuing eds, that it's a different number for different states. And you just have to make sure that whatever you're taking, you're continuing to ed on, that it matches up with the states that are requiring it. Deadlines. We all know that some renew once a year, some renew twice a year. What are your deadlines for each state? So the pitfalls that I've come across is recognizing that the barriers of our field is that we have fences around our states, and it is about collaborating. It's figuring out how to open the gate to the fence and not hop over it, cut through or break laws or become, practicing without a license in another state. I think that a lot of clinicians use that continuity of care to kind of bypass sometimes to get into another state. You just want to stay in communication with these state licensing boards, even if you're providing, one-off support systems. We understand in our field, there's a lot of gray. There isn't black and white laws and regulations on support sometimes when there's those questions that just aren't detailed answered. So the barriers and stub the toe moments, it's picking up the phone and calling the board and asking, like, hey, what are your thoughts? Can I do this? Is this allowed? What can I do and what can I not do? And they provide that info.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, I like how you brought up the importance of how each state has the different reporting laws, and it's important to know about that. It's also important to know about the CEUs, because some states require telehealth specific CEUs and some states don't. So making sure that you're staying on top of all of that is so important to ensure that you're going about this and in a legal and ethical way. And as clinicians, that is something that is first and foremost so important. What else do you think is important for Startup Nation to know about getting licensed in multiple states and going about it in this way where you're really above board?
I would say that the biggest piece is not only protecting your client, that's, I think, paramount, of course, the safety of our clients and supporting them, but also yourself. So keeping in mind your liability insurance, stay in touch with like what each state requires for that. But, in the state of Florida, they have different liability telehealth requirements in the state of South Dakota and the state of Minnesota. So recognizing your liability insurance, does it cover you in another state when you're doing telehealth? What are those limits? And just making sure that we work hard for the work that we do in the practice that we build, that if something happens, you just want to make sure all the corners and everything is covered, and not to scare people from getting multi-state license. I think it goes back to that very first question. What is your why? Why are you wanting to get licensed in another state? What are the pros and cons? Does it pay for itself? Absolutely, if it follows the why and it matches your full vision of your practice. Is it something that can be overwhelming if it's not matching up with your why? Yep, and you'll find it out pretty quick, and if it's working or not working. And so I think it's just staying ethical, taking care of yourself, self-care, making sure. I think that's another thing is your sweet spot for the number of sessions. Your telehealth sessions are different than your in-person sessions. So keep in mind that you want to recognize how many more can you take as a telehealth versus in person. So there's just so many little nuances with it, but it is something that you can create and form for your practice.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think that the markability, again, it's fascinating, because I think that it catches other professionals' eye when they recognize you're in one state and you're working in another. It almost has a double marketing advantage, recognizing that there's dual licensures and different supports. When you become competent and the best in your field with your specialty because that's your passion, you start to have that ability to connect with doctors, nurses. I mean, I haven't got to Iowa yet, but doctors calling from Iowa, just doing consultations, just asking for information because they recognize that they've heard, from the Minnesota, just that tri-state area where that communication starts to get word of mouth out.
Yeah, and that's part of becoming known as the expert, as the authority. And there's a lot of value in that for sure.
Well, and Kate, I think you brought up, people who live in rural, parts of the country, not having as much access to experts in the field that they're needing the most. And this is just such a great way for them to be able to get, quality care that they so desperately need, and going outside of their, own community to find the best care for whatever they have going on. So this was fantastic.
Absolutely. And I was going to say too, think of it as a single clinician working with your clientele, but if you're in a practice and you're growing a practice, think of how you can reach, in telehealth, almost satellite options for other clinicians, for coaching, for opportunities to be able to support other professionals in the field. That is something that I'm passionate about as well, is how can you become a licensed supervisor in another state? How do you get to support, the up and coming, therapists that are behind you? And so there's definitely different degrees of which you can certainly use these multi-license supports. I think the sky's the limit on this ability, since COVID hit and the ability to use telehealth. When you think of insurance, that's one thing I was going to mention as well, is like reimbursement. Well, what about insurance? That's like a bag of its own, but just recognize that yes, insurance can reimburse from an outside state, whether you're in another state. Yes, they can decline if you're in another state as well. So it's kind of a yes on both sides. But also, you can have those sliding fee scales. You can do cash pay, clients as well. So just know that any barrier that you run into, it's still doable. I've been doing this now about almost 8 months to 12 months now. And just got licensed up in Florida and recognizing how doable this is. It's just following the details and not skipping steps.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for coming on today and talking about the why behind getting licensed in multiple states, and then also the benefits, reaching expanded populations and becoming more of the authority and the expert in your field, being able to increase value and branding as a clinician, and then really meeting clients where they're at and being able to best serve people, especially people who are in rural areas, and doing so in a way that you're adhering to the legal and ethical requirements of our profession. Faith, what do you want to ensure that Startup Nation takes away from your message today?
The one thing I would say on takeaway is don't give up. Don't get discouraged. Don't get overwhelmed. Take it one day at a time, one step at a time. Set your goals. Reach out to your coaches. Susan's an awesome coach if you're not already working with her. Reach out to the Startup Nation group. We love supporting. It's about asking the questions to get the answers. And that's, I think, the biggest takeaway.
Awesome. I know you've mentioned a few times the Startup Nation group, and Faith is referring to our Facebook community. We have a large community on Facebook with therapists in private practice all over the continuum. And I think there's over 10,000 people in that group at this point, and it continues to grow every day. So find us there at Private Practice Startup, and we will send you the invite to get you hooked in. Faith, thank you so much for being here. It was wonderful to have you back on for round 2.
Thank you. I love being here. I love communicating with you guys and sharing knowledge, and I look forward to future opportunities.
Yes. And Susan, thanks for co-hosting with me today. This was fun.
Absolutely. It was great to hang out with you and Faith today. So thanks for having me co-host.
Absolutely. And Startup Nation, we hope that you are enjoying these episodes. We want to encourage you to subscribe, rate, and review our show, share it with your fellow friends and colleagues. And we want you to join us for next week as well. Katie and I come back and co-host together, talking about how to master the intake call with new clients. Obviously, a very important skill. So we will look forward to seeing you on that episode. In the meantime, stay inspired. Thanks for joining us on The Private Practice Startup. Visit theprivatepracticestartup.com for awesome resources, free trainings, attorney-approved private practice paperwork, and so much more.